Welcome. I'm Alison St, and this is a special edition of KOCT's North Country Roundtable. Today we are meeting the city. We are meeting one-on-one with every member of the Oceanside City Council and getting to know a little bit about who they are and what their vision is for the city of Oceanside. And now we're going to be speaking with City Councilmember Chris Rodriguez. Councilmember Rodriguez, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. I'm so glad and honored to be here today.
So now you were elected in 2018. This is your first term on the City Council. Tell us what it was that made you decide you wanted to get into politics in Oceanside specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from Chicago, and the United States Marine Corps brought me out to this region, this beautiful region, and I fell in love. I fell in love with Oceanside. I did 2 combat tours in Iraq. I got out. I started my own business and just really worked from scratch, from the ground up, and I just fell in love with Oceanside. And through success in a small business, you really start to see some of the dysfunctioning dynamics of local government, and you want to get involved and you want to step up. And I felt the calling. I got my boss's permission, my wife's, and it was full speed ahead.
Great. So just before we get to your career here on the council, tell us a little bit about your role in the Marine Corps.
Absolutely. So I enlisted when I was 17, and I was a combat engineer. I did boot camp, then I went to my MOS training, which is your military occupational training in Camp Lejeune, and then right off to Iraq. First tour, I was attached to 5th Marines, and we went from Kuwait all the way full speed ahead to Baghdad, and ended up taking on insurgents in Baghdad and taking over one of Saddam's palaces right off the Tigris. And yeah, a lot of great memories, but also a lot of painful memories you have to deal with as a veteran, in fighting for our freedom, and protecting what we have here in America.
Yeah.
And
did you have a specific role in the Marine Corps?
So what I would do is, when we were clearing out buildings, I would blow the door, and the infantry would come in and clear the room, and then we move on to the next and on to the next. So it was a repetition of clearing rooms and advancing forward on the offensive. A secondary role of mine was landmine sweeping and I wouldn't say disarming. We would end up finding like an improvised explosive device, and I would set a charge, and we'd blow the charge to prevent a convoy from being injured. I would clear trees if an avenue of approach, the visual wasn't there for our sniper unit. We'd clear the palms or what have you, so they had clear vision down an alleyway or an area that they couldn't observe. And so a lot of demolitions is what I primarily dealt with. Yep.
And now, hopefully in politics, you're doing more building up.
Absolutely.
But when you left the Corps, the first thing you did was you built a business for yourself?
Yeah, yes. So I did 2 tours, and so my second tour was in Fallujah, which was so much more grimsome, so to speak, a lot more tragedy. Got out, and I really needed to find myself. And having a young family, getting out of the Marine Corps. I was injured in my second firefight in Iraq. I got an RPG blew up next to my head, blew me back, and so there was some rehabilitation I had to go through in order to recover from that experience. And when you're going through that, you're not necessarily combat ready, from injury, so you can't re-enlist. And so I really had to change plans, change course, and a part of that was starting my own business, and which just took off, thank God, and kind of working from scratch, building from the ground up, and right here in Oceanside. I remember meeting with the Oceanside Chamber of Commerce and their networking groups and meeting for coffee, and just kind of learning the ins and outs of business and the hard work and the risk that's involved in being a small business owner and raising a family. And but I took the bull by the horns, no excuses, and one day at a time. I built a very successful real estate mortgage company and ended up buying a farm right here in Oceanside in South Morro Hills. And so I managed that with my wife, and we still have 5 children at home. 2 of them are older and, left the nest, so to speak.
And do you feel like there's risk in running in political circles?
Yes, but there's more reward. I think there's so much more reward once you get down to the, past the partisan. I believe all life is partisan one way or the other. And if you can just have a conversation with somebody and sit at a table and first identify that common ground that you both can agree on and start there, you can get so much done in the political realm. So, I don't care if you're right, left, center, if you could find that common ground and work from there, you can get a lot done politically.
Right. You were mentioning that you became aware of some of the dysfunctions in local government. Can you give us some examples?
Absolutely. Being in the private sector, having a small business, there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of reward, and if I don't work, I don't eat. From a city's perspective, they work hard, but there's definitely a lot more assurances, a lot less risk. So maybe for a small business owner, responding to an email or an application or an activity or task as a small business owner, there's a lot more risk. If I'm not on it, I'm going to lose this client, I'm going to lose this business, I'm going to lose my income, I'm going to lose food on my family's table. Whereas in bureaucracy and government, that risk isn't there. So, maybe they don't need to respond to that email today, or prioritize that application, process that business application all the way through to approval. They don't, government doesn't necessarily understand the risk involved on the private sector, and there's not that sense of urgency. We want there to be, but just inherently in government, it just doesn't work like that. It doesn't operate like the private sector, and it shouldn't. But I think policies need to be in play that make a city, a jurisdiction, business friendly and prioritize business. And instead of just saying no to something, you say, well, we can't do this, but how about we look at doing that and handhold that business owner through what they can do or what can be considered. Like that kind of a culture we need to have as a city.
Right, right. I'm just wondering, as somebody who is obviously highly motivated and is running a successful business. I don't know, do you still have the business now that you're?
Absolutely.
Why you would choose to go into public service when, the private sector is so attractive to you?
That's a great question. Somebody has to do it, and I feel the obligation because I'm in a position financially to provide for my family, which is top priority, right? Got to take care of your own backyard, otherwise you have no business helping others with theirs. And because I have that in line, and I have this motivation, this passion, and this experience to bring that success, so to speak, to public service for the good of the city that I want my kids to live in. I want my kids to raise their kids in our city. And, things like homelessness and housing affordability and crime and, tax revenues and infrastructure, these are things that are going to affect the next generation. And so the policies and the decisions we bring forward now must take our children's children into consideration. Otherwise, we're failing at what we're doing as elected officials.
So I'm hearing you say that even though you didn't come from Oceanside, you would like your family to, in the future, be able to stay in Oceanside for generations to come.
Absolutely.
So one of the key things about living somewhere is having a home.
Yes.
So let's just talk a little bit about housing and how you see Oceanside's efforts to provide enough housing, enough new developments to meet the need of a growing population.
That is a really good question. I think that's a question that every jurisdiction up and down the coast in California is trying to answer. I think it's a balance of more supply availability, but being good stewards of that supply to our environment. We can't just build and have all these impacts. We need to be able to mitigate for those impacts. Mitigate meaning, if you're going to build these units, how many cars is that development going to put on our roads? And how is that going to impact our roads, and how is that going to impact our environment? And so there's got to be balance. And right now, as a state, on a state level, there's not a whole lot of balance. There's a lot of regulation and a lot of restriction and requirements for the development community, which just add to the cost of construction, just adds to the end user. We talk about affordable housing. A lot of constituents I have conversations with, they don't realize that affordable housing is government subsidized housing, meaning our tax dollars is subsidizing that unit to be able to rent to a qualified low-income family, which is great, but unfortunately, that's an expensive use of tax dollars and they need to understand that subsidizing that one unit only increases the cost of these other units. So in essence, others are paying for that, and that's just we have a cycle of that in our state, and I think the fastest course to creating more affordability in California is we need to limit the regulation, expense of the regulation, and we need more supply. We need more supply. We are so behind. I know on a state level they're working on it, but we need more supply.
Right. Well, everybody's aware that Oceanside is on the hook for 5,500 homes in the next 8 years, and the question is, where are they going to be built? So we've talked with some of the other council members about whether it's a good idea to be preserving Morro Hills, which is the agricultural area, and there's a plan to build more along the corridors, Oceanside Boulevard, Mission, Vista Way. So what would you say as someone who's in the real estate business that the city needs to do to get developers to be proposing buildings in those corridors where the city wants them built?
Yeah, the developers are going to follow the rules that we establish, the policies that we establish. So we're, as local control as a council, and making what's called quasi-judicial decisions on development in different communities, is we have to balance out, okay, the state wants us to do this, but that may not be the best for our city. The private sector is a business. They're private enterprises. They're the ones that build housing. The government doesn't build housing. The government zones for it. And so we need to set zoning rules and regulations that prepare for Oceanside's future, that multi-generation, and that's going to be near transit, right, in those corridors, but we need to incentivize it. We need to give them the opportunity. We need to do some of the legwork environmentally ahead of time, and we're doing that. Our general plan is, over 36 years old. It should have been updated twice since it was last updated, and it hasn't. And that's why we have a lot of the issues we're having now. Our general plan is outdated, is irrelevant, and we're having so much conflicting information. And so through this update, which we will be coming to a head in the next 12 to 24 months, we're going to be able to set the tone and a clear message for the development community on exactly what we want to be a sustainable city that will build units and also mitigate the impacts that those developments will create.
So how do you tread that line between relaxing some of the regulations, but still preserving the quality of life, like keeping open space, making sure that there's good roads built to connect with all the housing, having parks? How do you keep the investment in the public sector while letting the private sector build more housing?
You set clear rules of what exactly you want. So if you if in your general plan you say you can build this many units per acre, you can go this high, if you create this impacts, you need to mitigate by expanding the road. You need to pay, there's fees that every developer has to pay toward parks. If the fees aren't high enough, then we need to raise them. We just need to set those clear standards and those clear schedules that the development community can follow. And right now, it's outdated and it's not clear. And that's why you see in our city, and there's a lot of frustration, you have the private sector coming in, submitting something that maybe city staff goes, yeah, we'll take a look at it. We understand our general plan's so outdated that we really can't give you a clear answer. And then it goes through the public process, and the city's like, well, it's not zoned that way. Well, yes, it's not zoned that way, but our zoning allows for variances and exceptions through the public process. And because our general plan's so outdated, we're going to have a lot of that confusion and conflict until it is updated, and we can find that balance that you just asked.
Right.
That balance will be identified in our general plan update on exactly what we want to prioritize Oceanside residents' quality of life, infrastructure in the future.
So I think a lot of people are completely unaware of the fact that the general plan is being updated and how important that is. But do you think that there are any single-family home neighborhoods right now in Oceanside that may need to look at becoming denser and having more apartments built just in order to meet our goals?
I wouldn't, personally, I would not want multi-unit, in a sense, being commingled into a residential neighborhood. I think for the most part, in my opinion, Oceanside is pretty built out. And we have to be very careful on, trying to force those densities and force items that don't fit. And it's a battle. It's a battle against the state. It's a battle against the SANDAG, the regional area of governments I'm on the board with. It's a battle. And so we have to be smart, and we have to think of creative ways to meet those required units. For example, I moved forward on a accessory dwelling unit, which is like a granny flat, streamlined process that gives reduced fees, a streamlined process for a homeowner, a video, a dedicated website, and I think the estimates are 400 to 600 granny flats are going to chip away at that required number. And so this is a creative way of offsetting some of those requirements. And it also creates residual income for the Oceanside resident. They can rent it out or help grandma or one of their college students. And so there's a lot of opportunity there, and we're going to continue to relieve pressure where we can.
Okay. Let's just turn to the other end of the spectrum, which is the question about the number of people experiencing homelessness, and the fact that the city has got quite a bit of money coming down the pike to do more for the homeless population. You have pretty much supported the rescue mission, I believe, to manage the new homeless shelter that's going to be in. Why did you pick the rescue mission over an agency that's been in North County for many years, the Interfaith Community Services? Yeah,
so San Diego Rescue Mission has actually been around longer. They've been around for about 70 years.
In San Diego, yeah.
Yeah, and Interfaith, they serve a purpose for a specific demographic of homeless. They are primarily funded by government, and my perspective is if a nonprofit is primarily funded by government, they are only an extension of government. And we talked about that dysfunction earlier on, and so I'm always hesitant to rely completely on an entity that's primarily funded by government. And I need to look elsewhere at what other nonprofits and organizations that are privately funded, meaning they receive private donations from a donor base to fund their nonprofit. And there's some very successful nonprofits locally that have helped the homeless population. They've been helping them for years, and they have an amazing track record. And San Diego Rescue Mission is one of those. They don't want any funding to operate the shelter. That's going to save taxpayers $1 million a year. $1 million a year. And they're going to come in with an amazing program that is very successful in San Diego. Low barrier, meaning you come as you are, right? It doesn't matter who you are. We're prioritizing obviously Oceanside residents, but if you have an addiction problem, if you're suffering from domestic abuse, if you have a plethora of issues, come as you are. We're here. We're going to feed you. We're going to clothe you. We're going to make sure you're in a safe environment, and then we're going to work out a plan. And they're not, they're going to come in and do that, and they're not going to charge us anything. They just need a building. And that's a win-win for our city. And I encourage Interfaith, if they would like to open a shelter, they could have been looking for one, but they had no desire to open a shelter or look for a shelter or fund a shelter until government says we have some money available. And that concerns me.
Right, and the fact is that there is quite a lot of money coming down the pike from the state for this kind of thing, but you feel like it would be better if it came from the private sector.
Absolutely. We've seen programs up and down the state that we're throwing millions and millions of dollars into, and the problem's only getting worse. And we have to change that pattern. And the decision for us moving forward with San Diego Rescue Mission is bold, and it sends a strong message that we're committed to really figuring out and solving the homeless crisis. and we're going to stop throwing money at a problem.
So you're representing District 2, which is the northeast quadrant of the city, which includes Morro Hills.
Correct.
Which is one of the more controversial parts of the city because there is a battle over whether new housing should be developed on it. And I believe you supported a developer's proposal to build new housing there. What do you think, though, about the fact that this is the last remaining agricultural land in Oceanside, and once built on, it is gone forever?
Yeah, I think it's important for all of us to understand the importance of, protecting what the definition of protecting agricultural land means. It's one thing if that reserve or agricultural land is owned by the government. It's another thing when that land is owned by private enterprises or private residents that live there, and what role government plays in restricting and limiting private property use. The general plan is over 36 years old, and when a developer submits an application, the city has to review it. And we have SB 330, we have several state bills that say, hey, we're going to take local control out of your hands, and we're going to decide for you if you don't figure it out locally. And South Morro Hills, I live in South Morro Hills.
Right.
I'm a farmer. I have a farm. The last thing I want to see is South Morro Hills paved over with housing. But we also have to understand that wages for farm workers are up, water costs are up, more and more acres of farmland, including in our city, are growing foul, and they're not growing. And the next generation of farmer in the family doesn't want to farm, and they want to sell their land. And what we're seeing is land values become unstable, and we need to create an environment that protects farming through policy. And that policy will require infrastructure. That policy will require opportunity. If you're going to allow a bed and breakfast or a boutique winery or hot air balloon rides, that needs infrastructure. That needs roads, it needs sewage, it needs lighting, it needs variables, and that costs a lot of money. And the only way you're going to pay for that is through limited inviting of development. Otherwise, it's not going to get paid for. And so South Morro Hills has been working on a plan for, almost 2 decades that involves development. That involves development on more than one house per 2.5 acres. And so it's very, very important when we talk about, building, that's been the plan from the beginning. Because right now we can build one house per 2.5 acres or up to 1,200 homes. And I'll tell you right now, there's no infrastructure there for 1,200 new homes. So building residence has always been in the plan. And you can't really farm on 1,200 houses at 2.5 acres a lot. You can't. There's not a lot of commercial farming that can happen that way. So we need to be realistic about how we move forward and discuss this controversial topic and, begin educating the community on a lot of these variables that they may not be aware of.
Now, I want to ask you the question that a lot of people are probably wondering, that you've just thrown your hat in the ring for the Congress, the
Yes.
Congressional seat, currently held by Democrat Mike Levin. And there is another Republican who is also running, Brian Marriott in Orange County. So why did you decide to throw your hat into the ring in 2022?
Yes, so I'm excited. I announced 5 weeks ago, and I have so much support across the board. I have an amazing campaign team. My wife, my family, and local Republicans, Democrats that support me, as well as independents, they're really getting behind me. The requirement to run and represent in this representative government is to be 18 years old and an American citizen. My entire life is a testimony to who I am. From my beginnings, my father, drug dealer, would beat the heck out of my mom. I remember sheltering my sister and being in a church's women's shelter. The first few years of my life was it was chaos. It was destructive, but I learned from that. I grew from it, no excuses, and I worked through that. Being a young father, working harder, graduating high school 2 years early, fighting for the American dream, becoming a United States Marine. that was my college. And serving 2 combat tours, coming back, starting a successful business, and bringing that business, to national heights, and then serving my community here in Oceanside, and everything we've gotten done in the last 2 years. That serves as a testimony that I'm wanting to fight for the American dream, not only for myself, but for my kids and for the constituents here in the 49th Congressional District. And so I think when they look at the lineup of potential candidates and they judge them according to their life and their experience, they're going to see that I'm going to best represent them and fight for them in DC. I'm excited.
How is this going to work? Just to walk us through the timing of this, because the primary is next June. So in June, it'll be decided whether it's you or Brian Marriott against Mike Levin. Is that the way it will work?
Yeah, it'll be jungle. So all 3 of us, or if anybody else jumps in, will be on the ballot, and the top 2 vote getters will move on to the general. So
I'm not going to predict the outcome, but does this mean that Oceanside has to bid farewell to you as a city council member?
I'm committed to 4 years. That I have one term that I was elected to serve, and I plan on fully representing Oceanside in that capacity the entire time. I don't plan on slowing down. And upon my expiration, and the outcome of the general election, it would be a transition from being a city council member to a potential United States congressman.
So are you definitely not going to run for the city council?
Correct, yes. I will not be running for city council.
Perhaps I should just ask, if you're looking for somebody to be on the Oceanside City Council, what are the qualities that you think a good city council member should have?
I really think there's a beauty to the younger generation kind of stepping it up. Right now, a lot of elected officials in different cities, you'll see they're retired or they're financially well off. We need Oceanside residents that are in the middle of their success that can really come and create some amazing change and dynamics and bring a lot of ideas to the table. So I would like to see, personally, an Oceanside resident that's in the peak of their success, that's willing to sacrifice some and step up to the plate and bring some of their ideas to help move our city forward.
So what's your vision for District 2 in the future?
Well, the District 2 is big. I think I have the most diverse district in, San Diego County. I have 3,300 acres of agricultural land. I have the largest population of Samoans outside of Samoa. We have the Deep Valley. We have we have some of the wealthy. We have some of those that are not wealthy. We have the extremes of everyone. And so what I would like to see in my district and in my city is, I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to our school district, which I know as a council member you have limited political or policy control over, but we can only grow so much without improving our school district. And our school district is doing horribly on a state level. And that affects things like crime, it affects things like graduation rates, it affects things like individuals going to college, individuals staying locally. And so it's very important we improve our school district. And number 2, we need to do more for our youth and that next generation of Oceanside resident. We have to do more to support the many organizations that are influencing our youth, from Pop Warner football to the soccer leagues to baseball. We need more fields. We need more programs. Right now we don't have enough. We don't have enough in those areas to enhance our quality of life for the next generation of Oceanside resident. And I want to see more, and I want to do more, and really focus on our youth and the next generation of Oceanside resident.
And do you think, from your brief time on the Oceanside City Council, that that Oceanside's government, city government, has enough unity to move forward and take advantage of the opportunities that I think everyone we've talked to today says are on our plate now?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We have we don't agree on everything, and I don't think anybody does. But we have a council that is determined to move forward on our major issues, and we're getting things done. And you see that in the voting record, you see that in the policies that are coming out of City Hall. And on any vote or decision, you're going to have individuals that support it and individuals that don't. That's just the nature of policy. But for the most part, as a council, as a body, we are unified, and we're gonna get a lot done.
Well, Oceanside City Councilman Chris Rodriguez, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you for joining us here on KOCT's North County Roundtable.
You're watching KOCT Television in Oceanside.